Hello and welcome to the Genuine Learning blog. My name is Melissa Galasso, and today we have a whopper of a proposal to walk through. The much awaited, set to come out in the fall of 2019, it came out in January of 2020, is the proposed changes to the Uniform Guidance. We know that this is something that we've been waiting for. This is something that's required by law. So as a result, we've been patiently or somewhat impatiently waiting for this to come out. I know I have been patiently waiting to some extent because I'm in the middle of writing a bunch of courses for 2020 about the Uniform Guidance, and I wanted to know what was going to change because this way I can try to incorporate it. Now, it's not going to change overnight because there is a comment period. But again, our goal here is just to give you some understanding of what some of the proposals are. So we're going to go pretty high level, and I'm going to go pretty quick because I want to make sure that I hit on the high points, but give you the opportunity to take a look and see what your thoughts are on some of these changes. Let's dive on in here. So as I mentioned, we knew this was coming because it's required. So back in 2013, when they issued the Uniform Guidance, Part 200.109 requires that every 5 years we get an update to the Uniform Guidance. And so we've been waiting, knowing that this is required. Now, it wasn't effective till 2014. And so as part of this process, they were looking to see, okay, based on this 5 years, what are we going to improve? And there were three main goals that they looked into OMB when they were making these changes. The first one is our CAP goals. CAP goals are what we call cross-agency priority goals. And there was something issued a few years ago in order to streamline, to be more efficient and effective, which is the President's Management Agenda, what they call results-oriented accountability for grants. So if you look, grants got a lot of attention in the President's agenda. And they really wanted to look at standardization, making things more results-oriented and less compliance-oriented. Not that we don't think compliance is important. We think compliance is very important. But if we are complying and are not achieving any results, you know, what's the point? So this is a cross-agency priority, and so that is one area where you'll see a lot of the changes are coming from. The second one was other authoritative sources. There's been a lot of guidance issued that now we have to comply with, and so they wanted to incorporate that. We've been looking at the problems with the NDAAs for years now related to the micro purchase threshold, finally getting them incorporated into the Uniform Guidance. And then problems with implementation. Anytime that we have implementation issues, it's best practice to try to update the guidance. And so this is one of the ways that they're going to do it. So as I mentioned, the President's Management Agenda found that we spend a disproportionate amount of time monitoring compliance with these ancient processes. If you talk to anyone, they'll say the burden and the time consuming it because our technology is out of date. So a focus on modernization and data. You're going to notice a huge format change where we really want to start using data to determine, are we achieving any objectives? Are we tracking performance in a way that makes sense? And so you're going to notice a lot of those. So in the 4 strategies that the President's agenda mentioned, the first one was standardization of processes and data. So you're going to see changes in terminology because literally, if you look at different parts of the federal government, they have a different term for the same thing. So they wanted to streamline the terminology so that we're all talking the same language. The second thing is if we want to use data, we need to use standard data elements. And so we've been focusing on machine-readable formats for some time so that the computer can read it and doesn't require a human to read it. And so you're going to notice a format change in that as well, focusing on, okay, can we pull these key data elements out? There is other parts of the strategy, building shared IT infrastructure. That's not really a huge part. It's some part of these changes, but not major. A focus on managing risk, but also achieving program goals and objectives. You're going to notice a huge section towards the end of the slides today that's really going to focus on that goal for the really trying to focus on achieving objectives, and if it's not working, changing things up. So when we mention the statutory requirements, there have been a bunch of things. I mentioned the NDAAs, the National Defense Authorization Acts. In 2017 and 2018, those things were doozies. They changed the micro purchase threshold. The 2018 changed the small acquisition threshold, but they weren't formally incorporated. And there were differences between certain entities. So educational institutions, research institutions had certain things that were only for them, and then they opened it up, and then we had to have OMB kind of issue some guidance to help us understand how that would be implemented. So that's going to be incorporated for FATA, the Federal Funding Accountability and Transparency Act. You're going to notice a huge focus on transparency. Digital Accountability and Transparency Act, again, a focus on data as a main element of this and in digital nature. And then my favorite, never contract with the enemy. And that's a small area, just obviously in the area of procurement, but I just wanted to mention it. So what are some of the big changes? Well, incorporates the guidance in M1818, which is the OMB memo, figuring out what was going on with all those NDAAs. However, it also proposes to extend the flexibility that if you feel a higher micro purchase threshold would be appropriate, that now all non-federal entities can request that. That was not included out there. That's going to be a new proposal. Merit review, another area that is getting a lot of attention, was that there were very limited areas where you had to include a merit review. And a merit review basically says that in addition to picking somebody because of dollars, we want to pick them because they're the best option. And so it's going to extend the merit review process to all awards where you have discretion to choose the recipient. Basically, who's going to be most successful in achieving results? Let's pick that person. And a merit review process requires that up front, you tell people how you're going to select them. I always use the analogy of it being like a syllabus back in college, right? On the first day of school, the teacher said, this is worth 20%, this is worth 50%, this is right. And they would go through and how you're going to be graded. Same concept for merit reviews. When you are applying, you need to know how you're going to be graded so that you have the best opportunity to put that information forward. So a big focus on anytime there's discretion, they want merit to be a key element of that instead of just currently a big focus on cooperative agreements and certain grants. Domestic preferences, so these come from 2 executive orders that came out, Buy American and Hire American, and then strengthened Buy American preference for infrastructure progress. Here, they just are going to encourage, to the extent that you are permitted, obviously, to maximize the use of materials produced in the United States. So that's in addition to the uniform guidance. Again, these are all proposals. We have the opportunity to provide feedback on the burden as well as the cost related to them. But again, this is an executive order that the president has put out there looking to focus on buying American goods and services. So you can see here that focus is now kind of trickling down to the uniform guidance. As I mentioned, standardization of terminology, a huge area. So changing the definition of period of performance. In particular, focusing on multi-year grants where you're only given a year at a time. So they really wanted to clarify what that meant. They replaced the term obligation with either financial obligation or responsibility, again, focusing on that Data Act. Oddly, I thought this one was something that shocked me, the concept of a CFDA number. I think that's been in my terminology for so long. I couldn't imagine it changing, but they are changing it to assistance listing number. So no longer the catalog of federal, let's see if I can even do it anymore, CFDA. I can't even remember what CFDA stands for anymore. Domestic assistance, there we go. So they want to change that terminology to just the assistance listing number. Management decision, they're updating the definition to emphasize that it is a written determination, so focusing on the in writing. Other things, today we talk about standard forms, and that means that all agencies are using it. Now they're going to focus on common forms. So maybe 2 or 3 agencies are going to use this form. That would be the, to try to, again, focus on collaboration and efficiency. They are trying to encourage as much overlap as possible so it doesn't have to be a standard form. And then reformatting subpart A. So anytime you put things in numerical order, especially when it has to be in alpha order, that can create some issues. So they want to facilitate the ability to add and change words. And so they're going to do that by removing and taking out those section numbers so that it can be edited more easily. As I mentioned, a focus on achieving results, right? That's one of the key areas that they want to focus on. So there's a new section called Program Planning and Design, focusing in on performance and really trying to encourage people to track performance. So it's shifting the focus to the balance between performance and compliance, right? Compliance is important, but if you're compliant but not achieving anything, Is that really the best use of our money? So it's focusing on results-oriented grants, focusing on program design, objective indicators, and requiring agencies to give some type of KPI, right? What are the indicators? What are the milestones? What are the goals for this program? What am I supposed to achieve, right? It's not receiving money for the fun of sake of receiving money, right? What am I doing with this money? What's the point? It also is going to focus on allowing more exceptions. If you have something you think is innovative, that is data driven, so long as it's a risk-based approach, they're going to focus on performance. And so if you need an exception to be innovative and try something new and different, they're going to encourage a little bit more innovation in the government sphere. Foundations of Evidence-Based Policy Making Act of 2018. So again, trying to focus on collaboration and coordination. That data, that evidence really is what they're driving on. Other areas for terminology changes, it strengthens the ability of the agency to terminate an award, right? So they're changing the words in the termination definition to allow, to the great extent possible, if you're no longer, part of your goals or priorities, that you can just terminate an award, right? So they're trying to prioritize support to awards that meet goals. And if you have a program that's no longer functioning in a way that is part of your priorities, they're trying to give people an out. Now, in fairness, they do tell you that you have to explain all the ways that, it would indicate that you are going to be able to terminate, but they want to make it easier for a federal agency to terminate a program. Fixed amount awards, these have been well received. When they first came out, the idea of not tracking spending was like mind-blowing, but people really like them. It encourages efficiency. So they're going to expand the use of fixed amount awards to both grant agreements and cooperative agreements. Now, this is not really new. It's more of an emphasis, saying that if you are evaluating a program, if you're looking at the effectiveness of a program, those costs are allowable costs and they are direct costs for that program. They also, again, trying to standardize of removing and prohibiting the use of references to non-authoritative guidance, right? So in your terms and conditions, you can't have non-authoritative guidance. It has to come from something that's gone through due process. Focusing on technology, machine-readable formats. These have been, required for some time now in terms of our reporting. It reinforces it again as part of that leveraging data portion of the CAP goal. We can't leverage data if we can't access the data. The GON Act, which is the Grant Oversight and New Efficiency. You'll notice that focus on efficiency. You think this is kind of counterintuitive, but one of the issues, if you're the pass-through entity, you have to get stuff from the subrecipient. Then you have to reconcile, then you have to submit it to the federal government. So they're going to increase the number of days for pass-through entities to do closeout from 90 days to 120 days, keeping the subrecipient at 90 days, giving them time from the time they get the stuff from the subrecipient to do the closeout. Now they are going to put some requirements in there to make sure that we do close out these awards, right? The longer you give, the more possibility it is that it doesn't get closed out. So they are going to put some, controls in place. Audit quality. This is something I have been interested in. We've been talking about it in all of my classes in the area of single audit because we've been expecting the audit quality project. So it tells us in the uniform guidance, in addition to every 5 years having to go through an update, every 6 years, you are supposed to have an audit quality study, which should have been 2019 really. They are going to push that back to 2021, given that we're now making, again, all these changes. They want to give us some time. So that is going to push back the start date of our audit quality project. The de minimis cost rate. This thing today is only permitted if you've never, ever negotiated an indirect cost rate with the federal government. People have argued that this thing completely reduces burden, especially if you did negotiate, but now you don't have the personnel with the capabilities to do so. They are going to allow the use of the 10% de minimis cost rate for all non-federal entities, with certain exceptions. So that's really one of the key areas there. And then if you're using the de minimis cost rate, the entire point is to not have to do all this reporting. It clarifies you're not required to provide proof of cost covered under that rate. So you don't have to prove that 10% is reasonable. The whole point is 10% is an arbitrary number that you just get to use. And so they're clarifying that. Negotiated rates, again, it requires all grantees' negotiated agreements now to be posted on some website. So this is part of the transparency element, I think it's out of FAFATA, that basically says that we should be able to know what people are using. So grantees going forward, again, they haven't really said what website and they haven't said what agency is going to focus on this, but the goal is to collect all of the indirect cost rates and put them on a public website so everyone can see what everyone has in terms of their negotiated cost rate. Interesting going forward. The NDAA of 2019, there are some prohibitions on buying, in particular, certain equipment and services from foreign entities. So particularly in the area of surveillance, and they're typically, a lot of them are Chinese in nature, but not exclusively. They are just incorporating that or proposing to incorporate that into the uniform guidance. And then, as I mentioned earlier, never contract with the enemy. I think all of the titles are really interesting. This requires agencies to utilize SAN and FAPIS to ensure compliance before awarding a grant or cooperative agreement. So they now have, so the SAM has been used recently for all of the non-federal entities, but now this is also a federal agency requirement. FAFATA, it clarifies that federal agencies may receive federal financial assistance. So we always talk about that they go to the non-federal entity, but in reality, some federal agencies receive federal financial assistance. And so as part of that transparency, they're opening it up, but they're also going to require the same reporting. GASB 68 makes changes to pensions, and as a result, there was some change in terminology that was causing a headache for applying. So they are revising the compensation section to, while you do have to follow GAAP, allow for pension costs that are actual and funded, because as you're aware, there's more of an estimate focus in GASB 68. This is going to allow us to use this without having to worry about being out of alignment. It also clarifies, which should have been the case all along, that question costs are not improper payments because, again, auditors question costs, but they do not make the final decision. So they're not improper payments until they're reviewed and confirmed, right? So in the meantime, they're just questioned. Pass-through entities, it clarifies that pass-through entities are only responsible to follow up on the stuff related to their subaward. So if a non-federal entity passes something through to a subrecipient and the subrecipient has an audit and has 20 findings and only one relates to your grant, they're not saying you have to follow up on all the other items, just the ones related to your grant. And then these FAQs, right? Should versus must. Wasn't clear in the original guidance. They issued it through an FAQ. The FAQ is a separate document. They're going to start incorporating some of that guidance from the FAQs into the actual uniform guidance as part of that, because those FAQs were used as part of the implementation and the correction and trying to reduce diversity in practice. So they're just going to take them and incorporate them into the uniform guidance, which makes a lot of sense. All right, I knew this one was going to be longer than I like. I try to keep them to the 7 minutes. It looks like we're going to be closer to the 20-minute mark, but there was just so much in here and I wanted you to be aware of it, given the importance, and so many of the clients that I work with do uniform guidance audits. I wanted to make sure that you were aware of some of the proposals, and if you're interested, give you the opportunity to provide feedback to OMB, because I think there are some things in here that are really awesome. And I think there are some things in here that might be difficult for us to audit and also might be a little difficult for the non-federal entity to comply. So for those of you who are non-federal entities, or for those of you who are audit firms, take a look, see if you have any comments for OMB and share them with them. So again, my name is Melissa Galasso. It was a pleasure having you on the Genuine Learning blog, and I hope to see you on a future blog. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.